to another edition of the Auburn Undercover Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. The first week of Auburn spring practice is now in the books. The first three practices went out with a bang, per se, because there was a big crowd on hand Saturday. Auburn's first open practice in Jordan-Hare Stadium, open to the public for the first time since 2007, so pretty exciting stuff. Lots of people there. There was a lot of stuff to go over, a lot of stuff that was shown that day that kind of, in a good way, closed things up for the first week of spring practice and kind of put a bow on things and helped us to kind of figure out what we learned in that first week. Obviously, only bits and pieces were shown, only a little bit of it we've figured out so far, figuring out what to expect out of this new staff, what to expect out of players in new positions, in new roles, asked to do different things. A lot of new stuff to figure out, but it was definitely an exciting first week, so that's what we're going to go over. Going to wrap up the first week as we look ahead to the second week of practice starting on Monday. So bit of a round table discussion. Well, not a round table, but getting a couple of people in here today to talk about their observations and their insight and their perspective of the first week of practice. We're going to start with Mr. Jason Caldwell, and we will get into that conversation right now. Here's Jason. And now we've got Jason Caldwell here on the podcast. He is driving back from Atlanta, right, Jason? That's where you were at the camp today?
Yep. Had a camp in Denmark High School, Xavier Capers, right above Alpharetta. So myself and Keith Niebuhr were there, and good day. Lots of good players in attendance, including Davis Harson, ninth grade quarterback, son of Brian Harson, which enabled Brian Harson to go to the camp. So he was there for a while today at the camp. So 2 days in a row, we got to see Brian Harson in person. So that was kind of neat. So.
Yeah, we got to see him in person for the first time ever. Looked the same he does on Zoom. How did his son look? What kind of quarterback is he looking like?
He did a good job, I think. Like most ninth grade quarterbacks, the guy that arm strength will get better, do those things, but he got a lot of work. I mean, a ton of reps today, throwing to the running backs, then to wide receivers. So I'm sure it was one of those days where we talked to Brian and his wife, and they were like, he was really quiet on the way over here. The 2-hour ride, probably pretty intimidating for a ninth grader coming from Boise to now jump into a camp in Atlanta.
Yeah.
But I think it was good for him, and he'll be a guy that I think down the road we'll pay a little bit more attention to.
Yeah, for sure. He looked pretty good in that one video he posted. Well, of course, Jason and Keith will have that recruiting stuff on the website to cap off a really fun week. Obviously, we're talking about spring practice. Jason, we were both at the stadium yesterday. On Saturday, you were busy taking pictures all day, but you probably got a better vantage point of everything because you were able to really zoom in and see the details. So I'm just going to ask you the same question I've asked everybody else today. Just what were your main takeaways from that practice? The first time we've been able to see this team in person in practice in a long time. I kind of thought things looked like they were run a little differently, and you and I were sitting next to each other for a good chunk of it. And I think you and I had kind of had the same guys that we thought were standing out. Who were your standout guys, and what are kind of your takeaways from the day?
Yeah, first for the overall practice, I thought it was exceptionally well oiled for a third practice, if that's what you would say. Now, obviously, there's some issues, mistakes that the coaches probably have a better idea of in terms of maybe execution on a play, things like that. But I only remember one false start type of play on an offensive lineman. Not a ton of guys jumping off sides. I mean, to do that in day three when you're learning a new system on both sides of the ball, I thought everything went really smoothly. And so to me, that was a great starting point. They didn't have a whole lot of issues with trying to get plays, in and out of things. You had a couple of snaps on the ground. I think both of them were with Trey Lindsey as the backup quarterback, the number 2 guy. Probably not going to be that guy when Grant Lloyd returns, but young guy kind of getting in the mix. They were taking snaps, did a pretty good job of doing that. Overall, I thought it was a really clean day. And then as far as the guys that stand out, I mean, it's hard not to look at number 4 and go, Tank Bigsby, everything, that we saw last year and more. I thought he looked really, really good in his cutting and moving, doing things he did. I thought Javaris Johnson had a really good day at wide receiver. It's a guy that I've seen a bunch of, out of Hewitt Trussville High School. People think back to Ryan Davis and kind of how important he was, that 2017 offense and a guy that could make plays in the middle of the field. Javaris Johnson's a similar type guy, but a guy that probably has more speed. And so I think he's a guy that in route running, he got some separation yesterday, in the interior. I think he's a guy that's going to be able to help this team. So I thought those two guys, thought Deshaun Manning looked really good on the offensive line. I thought he was a guy that, got some playing time last year, got that experience. I thought he did a good job yesterday and looked to be more explosive. And that's kind of my general takeaway overall too, is that you could see the difference in just the bodies of the guys. There's guys that have gained weight, guys that have lost weight, but I think everybody looked like they were a little bit more explosive to me. Now, some of that is it's the day 3 and you hadn't put on the pads yet. But I thought that the physicality, and I thought you could tell it more on the offensive line. I thought guys looked a little leaner. They may weigh more. I thought guys looked a little leaner and were moving around really well. And, maybe they're up in weight technically on the chart. To me, they looked like they were maybe a little bit more from the weight wise in really good football shape heading into the spring.
Yeah, I think you pointed out Deshaun Manning had those long arms, and you can really kind of tell how he uses those really well. But
yeah, I tell you, when I think about him, I think about a guy that Auburn fans will remember that made a similar move. Tyrone Green was a guy that made a similar move from defensive line to offensive line, ended up playing in the NFL for a while. Deshaun Manning's built very similarly to Tyrone Green, those really long arms that probably allows you to make up for not being 6'6". You don't have to be that guy if your arms are the length of a guy that's 7 foot tall. That's about what Deshaun Manning is. He got a lot of reach, and I think he's a guy that can maybe take another step forward this year.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about him, he was standing next to Sean Shivers, and you were like, "Well, his arm is about as long as Sean Shivers is tall."
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, Sean's another guy who looked really big. I thought the defensive linemen too. You're talking about the guys who lost weight, some of them gained weight. Jaron Handy, I thought, looked slimmed down a little bit more, like you said, a little bit more explosive. And then the guy that you pointed out with that picture you posted of him, Derek Hall, looks like a big time defensive end. And he was out there looking really good, making plays along the defensive line. Javaris Johnson, though, is one that I've been really interested to see. I know he kind of had some health issues, or just injury issues, excuse me. But yeah, really, really fast. I thought his ability, like you said, to create separation. I think he bailed out Bo Nix on the 11-on-11 that they were doing. I think he got open and kind of made a big catch in the open field. Only 5'10", but they're going to need somebody like that to replace kind of the speed sweep of Eli Stove and Anthony Schwartz. Did all of that. What did you think, Jason, of the just kind of the turnout for the day, and the fact that Harsin said this was good for us, this is something we needed to do? I mean, it was Auburn's first open practice since 2007. I mean, what does that kind of say to you about the difference and how harsh? I mean, again, we've talked about this before, but not good, not better or worse. We're not going to know until they start doing stuff on the field. But just the differences between this and the Gus Malzahn era start to continue. What did you kind of what are kind of your takeaways about the culture changing? We talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the week after workouts.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things. First of all, I think you're right. Change doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better or worse. Sometimes, though, a change is just needed. And I think you can see it. Reaction from the players, reaction from the fans. I think you can see that people were ready, just like, okay, it's time to do a little something different. And, it's kind of funny that, other than a couple of exceptions, you hear coaches now and we had Tommy Tuberville and a few other coaches that I've talked to said normally you get to year 10 and you start to lose fan base, and it may start a couple of years before that now. And I think we see that no matter who you are nowadays, it's hard to win enough. And an example of that, I'm listening. We're in the middle of NCAA tournament in basketball, and Leonard Hamilton did not take Florida State to the NCAA tournament until year 8. Now he's not at Florida State in year 8 if that happens anymore.
Right.
That's the world we live in now, and that's the challenge. And obviously, it's always going to be a little different. But I thought the fans showed out. I would guess 10,000, somewhere around in there. I would think is kind of what we saw from a fan perspective. I believe if they said, "Hey, 2 weeks from now, we're going to do one more of those before A-Day. We're going to have it open to the fans. It's going to be a scrimmage." I think if they did that, you could have 25,000 people there. I believe that would be a possibility. Um, but I thought it was a good day, the right move. Obviously, it gave recruits a chance to come sit in the stands and watch some, which I think makes it an even more correct play by Auburn. But you look at them, and I think there's some positives already out of this. And as far as culture goes, I think you can see these guys. It's a buying in process. I think every day that goes along, as they get from winter workouts onto the field in the spring, I think that adds to it every day.
Yeah, and like Brian Harsin said when we talked to him afterward, I mean, what you're seeing out there on the field is just bits and pieces. You don't know how much of it is even going to be used. So really what matters right now is the baseline of that culture. And like you said, kind of buying into his vision. What are you kind of looking for as we transition tomorrow? I'm excited to talking to both the offense and defensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, and Derek Mason. What are you kind of looking forward to as we now move into the second week of practice? They missed one day in the first week because of the tornado warnings, I think on Wednesday. So they're a tiny bit behind, but what are you kind of looking forward to as we move into the second week in terms of how this team is developing, like you said, still trying to put some things together?
I think a couple of things for me. I think we've talked about it. I've written about it a couple of times, and it's been really interesting to me to see the transition to more of a 3-4 look. We saw that some yesterday and at practice, in the open practice, and I thought it was real interesting that we saw Jeremiah Wright in the middle at times with Colby Wooden, Derek Hall, and TD Moultrie on the field at the same time in more of a pass rush defense. How they use those guys, the versatility up front, I think that's what I'm really anxious to hear about from Derek Mason. And then offensively, Mike Bobo, that the transition to meshing with Brian Harsin, and then just kind of his thoughts on Bo Nix, a guy that I'm sure he's very familiar with, had already been familiar with. I mean, even though he was at South Carolina on defense, you kind of pay attention to other teams in this league. And from a recruiting standpoint, I think Mike Bobo and Patrick Nix probably had some crossover between Georgia and Georgia Tech at some point. So I think he's a guy that he's very familiar with. Heard so far that they're really pleased with what they've seen from Bo to this point. So that'll be kind of the interesting hearing points for me, especially.
Yeah, definitely agree. Definitely excited for that one. We'll have all the coverage of that. Jason, we'll let you get back to driving. I don't know if that was you honking at somebody or somebody cutting you off, but
no, it was next to me, thankfully. So.
Okay, good. Well, be safe driving back, and we'll talk tomorrow. Appreciate Jason coming on the podcast, and we will get to a quick break. You're listening to the Auburn Undercover podcast. 2, 1. All right, and next on the podcast is Sir Mark Murphy from Inside the Auburn Tigers. Mark was also at practice on Saturday. Mark, I wasn't sitting next to you, so I didn't really get to hear a lot of your feedback in live time, I guess. What stood out to you? What were you looking at over the course of the day? And just kind of what's your general feedback from getting to sit in the stadium and see these guys in person in practice for the first time in a long time?
Yeah, I wanted to see how they organized practice and, what exactly was going on. And it looked like it was basically about a 4-ring to 6-ring circus out there most of the time. There was one act going on in one corner and one in the other corner, and a lot of individual teaching. And, the pace was good, Nathan. There wasn't much downtime. I think one of the things that sort of stood out, there was a 3-minute readjustment period for both sides during the, I think it was 11-on-11 work to let them fix some things real quickly on the fly, which seems pretty smart to me because, getting a game situation and something's not working, you're going to have to make some quick changes on the fly. Getting them used to do that, that's a good thing. And, the number one thing to me is that I saw a lot of energy out there. What did you think?
Yeah, I thought the same. I thought, what did they say? The attendance ended up coming out to like 3,500 or something like that. I mean, anytime you've got that many people cheering for you. I thought probably the best part in terms of energy and feedback was the one-on-one receivers and DBs drills. I mean, somebody's going to win that every time. And so people were pretty excited about that. But something that Jason brought up when I talked to him a while ago that I wanted to ask you about was, back when we were allowed to go to practice every once in a while, he thought this was very far along in terms of what was just their third practice because they missed the day. And you kind of alluded to that a little bit, talking about their organization. I guess just kind of, you've been covering this team a long time. What were kind of the differences in terms of what a Brian Harsin team looks like in practice? Obviously Harsin, he's a little bit more hands-on than Gus Malzahn, but to me, it seemed like everybody, you could tell that their off-season conditioning, the weight gains, the weight losses, you could definitely see that on some of these guys. What were some other things that kind of stood out to you just in terms of the way practice was run versus what we're used to with Gus Malzahn?
I think they probably did a lot of rehearsal in the off season about how they were going to do things. First Harsin was coaching his coaches on how he wanted practice run. And then the assistant coaches worked with their players and told them what they were expecting. And, also think about this, Nathan, all these guys are trying to impress and show, they need to be playing in the fall. And, Brian Harsin basically said he's giving everybody a fresh start. He said it might not stay that way through the whole spring, but he said they're rotating 1s, 2s, and 3s, equal reps. And, I saw the assistant coaches spending as much time coaching guys down what I would assume to be the depth chart as they did guys who are likely to be starters. And I think that builds good team chemistry and good team camaraderie. I think you make a good point about having some fans in there. Bringing some energy to the practice. I know Tommy Tuberville liked to do that even when they were practicing over at the old intramural fields. There was always a lot of people out there watching things. And I think the players, didn't want to embarrass themselves in front of fans. And so they gave good effort in those sessions.
Yeah, I think that what you said about, coaching up I saw Derek Mason working a lot with a guy like Devin Geis and a guy like Trey Elston in the secondary, not guys that we're used to seeing a lot of playing time, but like you said, fresh start. I think there are maybe some people, I'm interested to hear your take on this. I think there are maybe some people that are benefiting from that, from no history, if you will. Because a guy like Javarius Johnson was out there with the ones a good bit as a receiver. A big surprise to me was Jeremiah Wright getting a lot of reps with the ones at defensive tackle. Who were some other guys that stood out to you and maybe were a bit of surprises for you?
I'm going to go with a really old guy who didn't get to play a lot this past year, TD Moultrie. He's a guy that played more as a true freshman, and his playing time sort of decreased as a sophomore, a junior, and senior. Now he's back for a do-over on his senior year. And, I think he's ready to take advantage of this situation, move into a new position. He's playing that stud outside linebacker spot instead of having his hand down on the ground every time, which didn't seem to ever be real natural for him. In high school, he was a safety as a junior. Then he moved to a linebacker as a senior, and he was real effective, made a lot of plays, but just didn't turn out to be a great, consistent power pass rusher lining up against big offensive tackles. And this position, I think he's going to be lined up more on tight ends and have a chance to do a little bit of coverage, and some pass rushing, which should be good for him. So I agree with Jeremiah Wright. When they signed him, I expected him to be an offensive guard, and I didn't. Maybe he could get a look at tackle. And last year they needed another defensive lineman because their numbers due to injuries and some COVID protocols, and he actually held his own in there pretty well. So yeah, that's a guy to keep your eye on out there too. And there's it's hard to say for sure which of these young guys are going to emerge, but it would really be good for them if they could get a guy like Jay Hardy, who didn't hardly play at all as a true freshman, who came in with some talent and expectations. A guy like Zacchaeus Walker on the defensive front, who played some, but I think he might be ready to take a big step forward.
Yeah, Zacchaeus Walker for sure was somebody I was ready to watch him on the field, and then Jeremiah Wright came out, and I was like, wow, it's surprising, for a guy like him to step in. But I'm excited to talk to Derek Mason tomorrow about what has stood out about Wright. Mark, last question, I'll let you go. As we go into the second week now, what are some things you're going to keep your eyes on? And what are you most looking forward to about this second week as we still kind of, figure out what this team is in terms of their makeup?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, what type of personality it develops. I think the coaches are trying hard to make it a real physical offensive team who could run the football and set up the passing game with a good running attack. And, last year, the whole deal with the change in offensive coordinators was to set up the ground game with a good passing attack. And the passing attack just never was consistent enough to do that. And, Auburn had a great freshman running back, averaged 6 yards a carry, but a lot of that he did on his own with breaking some tackles at the line of scrimmage. And, by the time they get done with spring practice, it would be a really big deal, Nathan, if they could figure out who their starting five on the offensive line are going to be. And I think they got a chance to be a lot better than they were last year. Now, think about this. When they went into the season last year, they only had one guy on the offensive line who'd started for a game for Auburn. That was at center. And that was only a few games that had been started there. And then they missed all spring practice. Then during preseason practice, there was COVID protocol issues, and they had a hard time getting the same five guys out there practicing. Getting that offensive line straightened out in the spring is a big deal to me.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting to see how Council's injury plays into that when he comes back in the fall. We'll see how that goes. He's Mark Murphy. Thanks so much, Mark, for joining us and talking a little bit about practice. Excited to see where this team goes as we continue spring ball, and we'll be right back. Get to a quick break. We'll be right back on this edition of the Auburn Undercover Podcast. Just going to close things out here and look at kind of position by position what we saw and what we know of from week one. Quarterback actually was a little bit of a surprise because Trey Lindsey, who's a walk-on, was taking the second team snaps at practice on Saturday. Now that's because Grant Loy, who was Auburn's backup quarterback last season, Bo Nix, his backup quarterback, he beat out Cord Sandberg for that spot. Pretty good player coming out of Bowling Green. He transferred to Auburn last season. He's dealing with a little bit of a hamstring issue. And so he was kind of off to the side with the injured players, guys who were not full participants in practice. And so Trey Lindsey was in there taking the second team snaps. And, some people might be wondering, well, why is that not Demetrius Davis? He was brought in to be, Auburn was going to have a respectable high, supposedly a high caliber backup quarterback, which is an important thing in the SEC. Well, this was only his third practice of his freshman year, his freshman spring. So no, I wouldn't necessarily read too much into that. I mean, it's just probably a position that he is going to overtake by the end of the spring. But once Grant Loy gets healthy, which, by the way, it didn't seem like that much of an issue. I mean, he was just kind of didn't have any protective gear or anything. Talking about Loy, he just wasn't a full participant. So I'd expect him to be back at practice pretty soon. We'll get a briefing on that and any other sort of injury situations going on, because we're going to talk to offensive coordinator Mike Bobo tomorrow, recording this on Sunday. Right now, going to post it on Monday morning. So, and then Demetrius Davis looked pretty good. You can definitely see the athleticism. He had some issues, as did Trey Lindsey, had some issues taking snaps under center. That's something we wrote about a little bit this weekend. Obviously, Brian Harsin and Mike Bobo both have multiple style offenses, more pro style than Auburn has been used to in the past. So you're going to be taking some stuff from under center a little bit more, and these guys aren't super used to that. So Brian Harsin said after practice, just getting these guys used to it. I mean, it's something that they are not super experienced with it, whether they have been in Gus Malzahn's system for years, obviously haven't been doing it that much. And then most high schools nowadays don't really take many snaps from under center. So something to watch moving forward is them doing more of that. And you'll definitely be expecting more of that as we move forward. And then obviously Bo Nix was the starting quarterback on Saturday, in every single drill. He is their guy right now. Looked pretty much the same. I guess that's all I'll say, is that he looked pretty much the same as he did last season in practice. He looks a little bit bigger, a little bit more bulked up. That's how he looked from his freshman year to his sophomore year as well. To the wide receivers, another injured player there was Xavion Capers, who actually came out and was doing some drills at the beginning of practice. And I was like, okay, wow. He had that foot surgery after getting the injury in the bowl game. He had foot surgery in January, and then he comes out and is participating in practice. That was only the warm-up period. And then he actually backed off and was with all the other injured players throughout the afternoon, just kind of doing some stuff off to the side, limited participant, but I didn't know whether Capers was going to be completely out of practice after he had that injury at the in the Citrus Bowl. So good sign for him to be involved in things. Same deal with Shedrick Jackson. Now Shedrick Jackson, senior receiver out of Hoover, the most experienced guy left in that room. He's only got something like 15 career catches, but it's the most experienced guy because they're losing all their top receivers. He was the same way. He was a participant in warmups and smaller things, but most of the time he was just kind of working off to the side. But Brian Harsin sort of insinuated at the beginning of last week that his injury might have been, we don't know what he's dealing with, some sort of injury this offseason, a little bit more severe than Capers. So good sign for both of them to be in it. It looks like maybe by the end of, maybe we'll see them both at A-Day. Maybe they'll be fully suited up and will participate at A-Day. Other than that, another note, I made this note on the board in our notebook, was J.J. Evans, the redshirt freshman receiver, former 4-star receiver, got hurt. He limped off to the sideline a little bit and then had ice wrapped around his knee. But then in some videos, this is just kind of, hashtag journalism digging a little bit in some videos that some players were posting afterwards, just everybody kind of hanging out in the complex, getting ready to watch film. He was walking around, looked fine. So I don't really think it was any sort of issue. Again, we are going to talk to Mike Bobo tomorrow, and I'm going to ask him about JJ Evans, just make sure it was nothing. But that was something I noticed. It was kind of right in front of us on Saturday, right in front of where I was sitting. He kind of limped over. But in terms of the receivers group, moving on, I mean, like Jason noted, Javarius Johnson looked really impressive. Got a lot of reps with the ones, guy out of Hewitt-Trussville who hasn't played that much. So I believe now he's going to be a redshirt sophomore. Really hasn't played that much through his 2 years with the program. I believe, I can't remember what kind of injury it was. I was going to spitball, but then I remembered that I couldn't actually remember what it was. So I'm not going to put anything out there, but some sort of injury for him that kept him out a little bit last season. And so I know he was sidelined, just kind of in street clothes for most of the games. But like Jason said, really, really fast player who looked really good route runner. That's probably my biggest takeaway from watching him in person on Saturday, was his route running ability. Really impressive. So like I mentioned, they're going to need somebody to replace like that small slot, kind of a speed sweep type guy. And he's really fast. He's got great speed. Looks good with the ball in his hands in the open field. Another guy who's really similar is Malcolm Johnson. He was the 4-star receiver out of Virginia who reclassified and joined them last year. He only played in a couple games. I don't think he touched the ball ever, but he looked good as well. He was getting reps with the ones. It looked like the starting receiver group was Elijah Canyon, who had the big bowl game, Kobe Hudson, who had 8 catches, something like that last year. And then it was Malcolm Johnson or Javarius Johnson. They kind of swapped back and forth which makes sense. They're kind of pretty similar in terms of their skill sets. You'd think Xavion Capers will be slotted in there when he's fully healthy, maybe Shedrick Jackson as well, but all those names, everybody I just mentioned. Oh, and Kalen Newton got a good bit of playing time too, and he'll probably continue to get that considering he's a great blocker. He might be the best. Well, he and Shedrick Jackson are probably the best blocking receivers on the team. Tight ends, I talked a little bit about this in the story that I wrote afterward, is that they're using some fullbacks. And so Luke Deal and JJ Pegues were both playing fullback in the I formation a little bit. JJ Pegues definitely made the play of the day. He threw a huge block on Zacoby McClain in the backfield, definitely reminiscent of the one that he threw against Ole Miss last year, where he just buried somebody in the backfield. It got the crowd pretty fired up. So that was probably the play of the day. But Pegues obviously playing a lot of tight end. Tyler Fromm was playing there at tight end. And then Luke Deal as well were really, really involved with the starters. I will be interested to see how that group does moving forward, because John Samuel Schenker, who is the most experienced tight end in that room, has the most catches, yada, yada, and who's been a really good player at times for Auburn, has had a lot of pretty big catches, was not with them on Saturday because he also plays baseball. So he was in Oxford because Auburn baseball is playing Ole Miss. And I believe he got a hit. I believe he brought in some runs on Saturday. Anyway, it was interesting to see them put things in a 12 personnel with 2 tight ends in there. There was one formation I really liked with Pegues lining up at running back, and then he moved up to kind of an up back position, and then Tank Bigsby motioned in. at running back. And I don't even think they ran a play out of it, or a run play out of it. I think it was a play action, and then they threw like a swing screen to like Kobe Hudson. Lots of eye candy, but not the kind of eye candy we were used to with Gus Malzahn. Definitely using more stuff close to the line of scrimmage. So pretty good looking group. Brad Bedell, that position coach, I continue to hear great things about him. He was really fired up, really involved, not only with his tight ends. He was really excited after Kalen Newton threw a block. He like ran onto the field to celebrate with him. They think they're really lucky. They think they are really lucky that they got him to come over from Boise State. So far, the players love him, and he is definitely, in terms of early impressions, been one of the best Auburn assistant coaches of this new staff so far. Offensive line, like Mark said, it would be beneficial for them to have the starting five by the time spring is done. It was the same starting five on Saturday. It was everything you would expect. It was pretty much what they left off with last year. Obviously, Brandon Council, who does have a shoulder injury, was in a sling. So nothing on his knee. So he must be progressing well from that knee injury last year, but he was out with a shoulder injury. It was the same lineup left to right. Brodarius Ham, Tayshawn Manning, Nick Brahms, Keandre Jones, and Alec Jackson. I'm like trying to do it in my head without even looking at it. Alec Jackson at left tackle, Tayshawn Manning at left guard, Nick Brahms at center, Keandre Jones at right guard, and Brodarius Ham at right tackle. However, they did, like they did last year, substitute in Austin Troxell was playing some left tackle, and Brandon Coffey was playing some right tackle with the starters as well. So like we've been talking about all off season, you add in, so those are two more guys. You add in a guy like Council, you've got 8 players who started on that offensive line last season. Will Friends got a pretty big task ahead of him to try to narrow that down. But like Jason said, the only thing you could really take away from Saturday was that they all looked athletic. They all looked like pretty good in terms of what they were doing, getting up and down the field and being able to be there and kind of go against the defensive linemen and not look like they were getting beat super often. So it definitely looks like the offseason workouts, again, all the players, works pretty well for everybody. Everybody seemed pretty excited. And like Jason said, some guys were trimmed down. You could definitely see, for me, the biggest one was Jaron Handy. I guess as we'll move on to the defensive line now, Jaron Handy definitely looked slimmed down. And then Derek Hall, I think he gained 18 pounds, something like that, give or take 18 pounds this offseason or since last year. Definitely looked the part. We were talking a bit about the defensive line, and it was 3-4 as a base for Derek Mason. But like Mark said, it'll be interesting to see how much of that they use going forward, and how much of this was just kind of a baseline that they're going to take from a little bit, and they might change things up later. Anyway, Derek Hall, of course, edge rusher. TD Moultrie getting a lot of playing time with the starters. Tyrone Truesdell kind of was in there as that bigger defensive tackle. But he and Jeremiah Wright, who is an equally large man on the inside at defensive tackle, were playing together a good bit. And then you had Colby Wooden in there at defensive end because he might have been Auburn's best defensive lineman last season. You're going to see him a bunch. And then just kind of going on, I mean, Dre Butler rotated in with the first team a little bit. Zacchaeus Walker rotated in with the first team. Those guys are expected to compete, obviously, for a starting job along the line. But Jeremiah Wright was the one who stood out. I mean, he looked very, very natural. Obviously, it was a guy like Mark talked about that was brought in to play offensive line. Looked like he was going to had the mold of a pretty good offensive guard, but looked really, really good along the defensive line. So excited to ask Derek Mason about him. Linebacker, exactly what we expected. I mean, Owen Papo and Zacoby McClain are one of the best linebacking duos in the SEC coming back this year. Behind them, immediately when they just had 2 inside linebackers, you had Chandler Wooten and Cam Riley were the 2 after that. And so kind of that top 4 group was mixed and matched. That's really what you were looking at in terms of your top guys. Really, Auburn's going to use, Derek Mason's going to use 4 or 5 linebackers in his rotation, but obviously Papo and McClain, they lean on them a lot. They're 2 of the better players on the defense. In the secondary, Ladarius Tennyson, was definitely at safety. That's something that we thought was going to happen based on what players were saying this week. And sure enough, he was the safety back there alongside Smoke Monday. Nehemiah Pritchett was playing some nickel. He was a phenomenal cover cornerback. He was even better. I'm going to talk about Nehemiah Pritchett again. Anyone who's listened to the show in the past knows how much I like Nehemiah Pritchett. He was incredible last year. He's a little bit better than Roger McCreary at the end of the season. And so it was Roger McCreary and Jalen Simpson playing corner. Nehemiah Pritchett, when they needed a nickel, when they didn't need it, he could slide back over to corner. So those 5 guys, Smoke Monday, Tennyson, Pritchett, Simpson, and McCreary, were kind of the top group again for Derek Mason, because that's really all you can look at right now. You don't know exactly how he's going to line things up, because they were running some things where there were definitely more than 11 players on the field. You kind of had guys shadowing, and you couldn't tell whether he was just trying to look at how some guys looked at a position without actually running a play. It's not an actual play they're running. He's kind of just testing things out. So again, bits and pieces here and there. That's all you can really glean from it. But really, I think those 5 guys were your top group. Marco Domio, just a note, he is injured. He was off to the side, and as is Zion Puckett, the nickelback, both of them injured. But like as was the case with Capers and Loy, they were just kind of chilling, doing their own thing. Nobody's injury really looked, other than Council, who was out completely. Everyone else had pads on. Everyone else was padded up. Guys like Capers, guys like Domio, they were padded up, were completely dressed out. They just weren't full participants. The only one who was not dressed out at all was Brandon Council. So I think that's a pretty good sign. And again, especially because Brandon Council didn't have anything on his legs. Looks like he might be progressing well from that leg injury, that knee injury. And now it's just time to get that shoulder healthy. And so I think that's it. I think that's kind of the rundown of what we saw on Saturday. We're going to get another, I believe on Thursday, we're going to get another time inside the stadium to go see them practice. This one's not open to the public. It's just a media viewing period. It's probably going to be 20-25 minutes of us being able to watch a segment of practice. So really excited for the way that things have gone so far. Obviously, they've only had 3 practices. Brian Harsin said they'll make that one up that they missed because of the tornadoes. They'll make it up after A Day. But really excited to see where things go. It feels great to be back covering football practice again and being able to go in person. So it was a pretty cool thing for Brian Harsin to do that and open it up. And I think all the players, like we were talking about before, they're really feeding off of it. And that was really fun to see. Fun to see everybody out there really having a good time. So appreciate everybody listening. Anyone who was able to go on Saturday, I hope you guys had a good time. I certainly enjoyed it. Great weather. Thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. Hopefully we can catch up. If you see me at the stadium or anything like that, if we do another one of these, definitely say hey. If you guys like the podcast, please leave a 5-star review. If you have any suggestions or anything like that, definitely direct message me on Twitter or our message boards. Again, leave us a 5-star review. It really, really does help us out. The intro and outro music is by Beats by Mordecai. You can find him on Instagram, Twitter, and SoundCloud. He does a really good job. Shout out to him for getting us that music. I think it's pretty good. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks so much for listening. Hope everybody has a great week.